Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Glad you could be here. We have Dan McGaw, who is going to be sharing some great insights for us to help us work with analytics. This is an important topic. The way that this is going to work today, and unless Dan has some different feelings as we go along, is he's going to have a presentation that goes on here for a while, and at the end we'll have questions. I'll be watching for questions as we go, answering what I can and holding those that I can't until the end. And we'll open it up to questions, and you'll be able to ask Dan the questions you have about analytics. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, and he can let us know how we can use his knowledge to get us started with these event-driven analytics.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me, Jim. I just want to make sure, as a real quick housekeeping thing, if you can hear my voice, definitely, if you just want to drop it in that questions box, it'd be super helpful for us to better understand, make sure everybody can hear me. Jim, can you hear me just fine?
Yes, I'm hearing you great, Dan.
Awesome. That's perfect. Well, just in respective time, I noticed that we have 22 people that just jumped in, so we're going to give it just a couple more seconds for everybody to jump in, but we are going to get started right away. So what I'm going to be presenting on today is how to get started with event-driven analytics. So definitely going to be helpful for everybody if you are trying to get more involved with analytics. But I will add, this is not going to be heavily focused on how to just read page views. This is going to be much more focused on how do you measure the behavior of your users, how do you get more granular tracking, and really make sure that you can actually deliver upon your promises by making sure that you as well can measure their behavior. So now, the first thing I want to kind of get started with is like, who the hell am I, right? So my name is Dan McGaw. I'm the CEO founder of Effinamazing. Effinamazing is an analytics and growth consulting company. We help a lot of companies get set up with their analytics. So what is the right tool for them? How are they going to strategize and how to actually get these tools set up? We manage the integration process, and we as well as help them deliver insights. We also do a lot of marketing operations. So this is going to be building out basically all of the integrations between their tools and things along those lines. But before this, I was actually the head of marketing at KISSmetrics. So I actually worked at one of the larger analytics companies out there. And before that, I was actually the head of growth at another company called Code School, which is an online educator for developers. So not only am I a marketer, but I am also extremely technical. And I've been able to kind of work on both sides of the table and make sure everything is getting set up correctly. But obviously, the big question, right, is like, how do I do analytics, right? I'm an analytics expert. I've been working in the space for a long time. A lot of people wonder, how do I actually do it? And it's kind of simple, right, is the fact that we obviously have to find the right tools for people. But the biggest problem that we all face is the fact that there's just so many options, right? There's a lot of options, and there's new analytics tools that come onto the space every single day. So really, really difficult when you're basically going out there and trying to pick a tool. Now, obviously, we're all aware of Google Analytics. If you don't have Google Analytics on your site by now, we have some serious concerns about what you're doing. Obviously, Google Analytics is the dominant player in the space. For the people who don't understand the history of Google Analytics, it originally was a tool called Urchin Analytics. Google then bought Urchin Analytics. That's actually where we get the word UTM from. And if you're not familiar with UTM on the call, definitely Google it. You'll figure out some information there. But either way, UTM even stands for Urchin Tracking Module. This is actually what Google Analytics used to be. So Google Analytics is free. You should have it on your site. It measures your page views. It can measure e-commerce stuff. Really, really good, powerful tool, but at the same time, it doesn't allow us to really understand repeat purchase rates. It doesn't enable us to track users over a year. It doesn't allow us to understand lifetime value. And especially if you're a SaaS business, this isn't a really good tool for you because you can't measure your monthly recurring revenue in here because it only is going to measure basically the revenue actions that happen on your site today. It is not going to integrate with your billing system. So there's a lot of other tools that we recommend. Some of those tools which are more popular, of course, are Mixpanel and KISSmetrics. We would call these more of digital business intelligence tool, but once again, they're overall web analytics. Both of them work on mobile devices. I would also add that Amplitude is another really, really important company that's been coming out in the analytics space, so I would definitely check out Amplitude. But just like I said, there is hundreds of tools to choose from. It all depends on what type of business that you have, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve, and as well as what type of people do you have on your team. And just a really easy way to explain that with the Mixpanel and KISSmetrics is if you have a very technical team, Mixpanel will be much easier. But if you have more of just a marketing team that is less technical, KISSmetrics is potentially going to work out a little bit better for you. So if you have questions about that, don't hesitate to let us know. Now let's keep going on. Now the biggest problem that we see with people when they set up their analytics, and this is obviously something you should all be aware of, is that people typically track too much. They get so focused on the fact that they need to track every click of every button. They want to track every click in their navigation. They want to understand every single page that a user loads. But the problem that they don't understand is that this is basically just going to be noise. When you do think about your business, you don't think about it and how many times did somebody click the home button. You really do think about it. Did they visit the home page? Did they view our pricing page? Did they make it through the sign up process? You're not basically looking at, did they click the button in the hero? Did they click the button in the bottom? If you're doing that kind of analysis, you're pretty well off in an analytics framework. So first thing I want to make sure everybody understands when going through the process we're going to have today is don't track too much. Start out small and build up. Now, the big thing that I recommend with you guys is obviously analytics is all about asking yourself, is this metric going to create action in our organization? Going back to what I just said, if you measure the button on the hero section of your site and the button in the footer section of your site, and you see the clicks there, is it really going to enable you to create action? If you see a lot of clicks on the one in the footer, what are you going to do? Make it bigger? If you see a lot of ones in the hero section, what are you going to do? Change colors? Like, there's not a ton of action that you really get there. So what is the point of actually measuring it? Now, don't get me wrong. From a micro conversion perspective, if you're a big company like Verizon, yeah, there's things that you can do with those button changes. However, if you're a company that's doing less than $10 million a year in revenue, or even less than $100 million a year in revenue, you probably don't have the time or the resources to do the correct analysis on those micro conversions. So when you start out doing this stuff, make sure that you stay small and make sure that every single thing that you create, every event for tracking, you actually are going to be able to use that for action in the future. Don't measure something unless you can turn it into action. Now, I'll give you an example. In my business, I have one primary metric that I have. Obviously, somebody visited the site, and did they create an appointment in a free consultation with us? Now, I can obviously track hundreds and hundreds of things on my website of all the things users do, but when we really distill it down to what is my North Star metric, it really simply is, did they create an appointment? Right? And as we can see on this slide here, of course, our direct traffic is driving some of those conversions. Social, referral, and organic are driving those conversions. And we can also see that organic traffic is driving our highest conversion rates. Now, this is definitely helpful, but it is the easiest way that we're able to drive action. We obviously can say, hey, somebody created an appointment. We understand the channel that it came from because we were able to splice that down. We now know that maybe if we want to increase that, what we would potentially want to do is invest more time in content marketing. That is an action that we can actually go and do. So really, really important stuff. Now, for your business, it may not be the same. I run a consulting company. I also have multiple web products, so I understand these different types of metrics. But my metric of getting an appointment is totally different than yours. In yours, you may actually need to track MRR. You may be looking at bookings. How many leads are being created? How many meetings are my sales reps setting? How many opportunities are being created? Or were there closed deals? Now, for all of you on this meeting, these can all be different, right? Some of you may be in e-commerce where your focus is on, hey, we need to get leads that convert into revenue. Some of you may be in a SaaS business that's self-service and you're only focused on MRR. Some of you may have an enterprise business where you're focused on leads, meetings, and opties, right? So these are all things that you need to identify before you ever even try to get started. Now, if you have additional things you want to talk about during this webinar, don't be afraid to hop on Twitter. You'll notice at the bottom of this slide, we have hashtag #FNWebinar. Use that if you have any questions, and I'll make sure to reply to all those tweets after this webinar. Now, let's talk about some interesting stuff. Now, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Now, this is a really, really interesting quote because this goes back to a lot of the problems that we have in marketing. Marketers want to track everything, but a lot of times the things that they're tracking don't actually count towards anything. They don't really even matter. They're just tracked to be tracked because somebody thought it was cool. Meanwhile, a lot of things that do matter, you actually have no real way of tracking. So I'll give an example. Dark social, which not everybody is familiar with, is basically the effect of when somebody sees something on Facebook, they then copy that link and send it to their friend through Facebook Messenger. And then, of course, we want to be able to connect the dots to know that when their friend clicked on that from Facebook Messenger, that's how it basically got attributed. Now, there's marketers out there that are so focused on trying to figure out how to connect these two dots. However, does it really matter that much that the user shared with another user and that user came and converted and how they actually did it? in many situations, the actual fact is it does not matter that much. It is helpful, it is cool, but it's not really going to drive your ship forward. So there's just certain things that you just can't count, and there's certain things that you can count that just don't matter. So make sure that you ask yourself that difficult question: can I make action out of whatever I'm trying to track? All right, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff, right? We talked about some of the high-level philosophy and some of the things that I recommend to focus on and some of the things I recommend not to focus on. And I want to make sure that you all understand tracking less is typically better for you in the beginning and even in the long run. I've done this dozens, if not 100 plus times. Tracking less is really, really important. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to start out with is a plan. Anybody that we've ever seen implement analytics without a solid plan has failed. They've corrupted their data. They've wind up spending thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it set up. And then they finally get there and they're like, oh, this doesn't work, because they never had a plan. So I want to teach you some tricks of the trade that we've learned over the years and want to make sure that you start out with a successful plan so that way you don't have these issues. Now, first thing is, I highly recommend starting out with Segment. If you go to segment.com, it is really, really easy to use. You're going to need to use your developers to get this set up, but it is the best way to start implementing your analytics, and not to mention your entire marketing and sales stack. Now, the easiest way to explain Segment is it is basically the Rosetta Stone of APIs. Now, what does that really mean? I'll help provide some context. Now, you have a marketing website and hopefully a web application or something that you're running your business on. When you go and install KISSmetrics on that site, you're basically dropping the KISSmetrics JavaScript. And then whenever you want to measure something specific, you need to basically write km.track in JavaScript and basically put it in the code so it can actually identify when these user behaviors happen. So somebody clicks a button, you have to install a track JavaScript there. When somebody signs up, you have to install a JavaScript that says signed up there. So that way it flows into KISSmetrics. Now, the problem is that if you have KISSmetrics and you set up all that syntax, as it's called, basically its JavaScript language, all of that information only works with KISSmetrics. So let's say that you want to start rolling out Hotjar, right? Hotjar being another analytics tool that enables you to do some surveying and heat mapping. Well, if you want to make that work, you obviously have to now use the Hotjar syntax, basically their JavaScript language, to make it so it works with their tool. Now, let's say you want to add HubSpot as your marketing automation tool. Then you want to add AdRoll as your retargeting tool. Then you want to add AdWords as your paid media tool. Then you want to add Facebook basically as your another paid media tool. But then you also want to roll up some attribution tool like LeadsRx. Now, the problem is all of these tools will come with their own snippet of JavaScript, and they all require their own syntax, which is basically the way they communicate with their web service, so that way they can measure the actions on your site. Now, that sucks because you basically have to maintain 10 to 20 different languages on your site, and that means 10 to 20 different syntaxes that have to stay maintained. If you make one change or one thing that you want to change on your website, you basically have to update all 20 of those different languages, aka syntaxes, to make sure it stays basically current. Now, this is a broken model, and Segment understood that years ago. Years ago, Segment said, listen, we're going to come out with analytics.js, and all you have to do is send us basically analytics.track, and what we'll do is we'll translate that into all of the native syntaxes of those other tools. So you add our JavaScript. By using our JavaScript, we obviously send all the data to those other tools. You write one line of code, we make it work with 20 other different tools. This saves you a ton of developer time. So I highly recommend that you set up Segment and you start using it. It is a little pricey from a monthly subscription perspective, but if you compared it to the amount of dollars you would spend on developers, usually you're saving nearly 80% of your development time and spending it on basically Segment, and you only have to pay 20% of the cost. So really, really helpful and really, really good. Now, obviously, once you get these Segment tools set up, what you need to do is you need to start identifying what do you want to track. Now, you'll notice really quickly, we have an event equals an action taken by your user, and then we have an event property is the context about that action. Now, the easiest way to explain this is basically if I was to jump, that would be the action I took. So I may have an event called jumped, J-U-M-P-E-D. Now, we want to name those past tense because obviously we're looking at these things after they've already happened. But we obviously want to understand maybe how high I jumped, or what color shirt was I wearing when I jumped, or even how was I doing my hair when I jumped, right? All of these things would then be descriptive that we would add as event properties, right? So this is the context about that action. So like I said, maybe the event is going to be the action I took with is jumped, but I jumped 2 feet high. So I would have an event property that it ultimately would say 2 feet high. I hope that helps explain some of those things. Now, let's look at this and how we organize it in a spec. Now, this is an analytics specification guide or a schema, taxonomy. There's many different things you call this. But if you were to go to http://bit.ly and then analytics spec, you can actually download our KISSmetrics spec, which will help you get started. And I'll explain some of these fields for you now. So the first thing is obviously for this company, they were viewing a case study. So viewed case study, which would be the event because that was the action they took. We also then describe what exactly that is happening. So for an example, this event should fire when someone views a case study itself. This will not include viewing the high-level case studies and the pages, but actually looking at the case study. So we write out a description so everybody's on the same page with how this is going to work. However, we didn't really tell you which case study they viewed, right? So we have a property name, which is going to now enable us to basically create, as we would say, a dimension or a filter. So basically that would be case study because we want to obviously say which case study it was. So in this one, it was the K Ginger Consulting case study. You'll also notice that we have a property description that will basically explain what that is. And as well as we have a little bit of documentation off to the right that shows you the JavaScript that you potentially would have to use to track that. Now you'll notice this is not written in segment. So it says mixpanel.track. Viewed case study is the event, and then the property name is case study, and the property value is K Ginger Consulting. Now, if I looked at this in analytics, I could filter by case study, and then I'd be able to see all the different types of case studies that there potentially was that they viewed. So it makes it really, really simple. Now, having an event schema, event taxonomy, and all these things is absolutely critical. If you do not have an analytics Bible or an integration Bible, an analytics spec, you're basically going to do all of this stuff wrong. So we want to make sure that we get that set up. Now, obviously, what we want to do first is build out all of our events. So once again, some quick things is the event should be a past tense verb. So as I said, viewed case study or trial started or trial ended. Past tense verb. Now, obviously, the property is basically an adjective. It's the descriptor, right? What is this thing? So we definitely want to make sure that we do that. Now, the first thing you want to do is go through your funnel and look at all the important actions that it takes for somebody to basically complete sign up and then complete a purchase. So this may be viewed homepage, viewed pricing page, may even have signed up, may have started free trial, activated product, and then paid subscription. Things along these lines. Now, you're going to want to make sure that you have all of those events line item first, and then come back and actually add the adjectives to it. So obviously add the property names and things along those lines. So for an example, what we would use if somebody signed up, let's say that on your sign up page, they can sign up using their email, they could sign up using Facebook, or they can sign up using Google authentication. Well, you would still have all of those things under one event. It would be called signed up. However, you would have a property name that would say authentication type maybe, and then the property value would be Facebook or Google or email. So that would be how we can make it so that we can splice that data later and get as much value as possible. But let's kind of keep moving on. Now, once you build out these events and these actions and their descriptors, the next thing we want to worry about is the actual people themselves. We want to start building out the customer profiles. These are also called traits or identity calls or identify calls, things like that. But at any time that we have an action somebody does, if we want to store information at the same time about that person, we need to call an identify call or a traits call. Now, what this basically does is when somebody signs up, you want to store their first name, last name, email in your database or inside of your analytics tools. This way, if you integrate it through Segment, you store that first name in HubSpot, but you also store that in Mixpanel and KISSmetrics and various other tools. So we basically need to come up with traits. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is come up with a people property name. Once again, this is a dimension at which we would look at the data, or in essence, a filter. So we could say case studies viewed. So going back to that event, every time that happens, we store that actually on the person's identity, and we can, later use that for personalization or understanding which customers and which case studies actually give us value. Now, for those traits calls, these are mainly going to be stored with an identity or with the person. So in many cases, if you're integrating through Segment, this means it's going to be stored in your CRM or your marketing automation tool. Platforms like Mixpanel are going to store these in basically the people properties and stuff like that. So once again, you want to make sure that you track those things. So you have a people property name, what is the case studies viewed, and then of course you would actually have that actual descriptor as the part of the value. So pretty straightforward, but once again, can get very, very complicated. Now, once you've gone through and basically built out, and I will go back to, there we go. Once you basically build out these events and you built out some of this stuff, The marketing team, not the entire team, the marketing team that's doing this, or even the salespeople or the marketing managers, the less technical folks, and the best way of saying that, need to do an internal review and need to review all of these things. So a couple quick tips we want to make sure is obviously make sure the naming makes sense to everyone involved, especially people you haven't hired yet. So for an example, developers who do analytics schemas are typically going to use whatever it says in the code as an event. So user created would be the event. However, if you said user created to a marketer, they'd be like, what? If you said user created to the intern, they would be like, well, how did that happen? However, if you said registered or signed up, these would be things that everybody is much more familiar with. So we want to make sure that the nomenclature we use is familiar cross department, cross specialty, and things like that. These need to be things that people can very quickly type in and recognize. And we'll learn a little bit more about that before. As well, or a little bit about that later. As well as we want to keep things short. No 45 character event names, right? We want to keep them nice and simple. We want to say signed up. We want to say canceled. We do not want to say canceled on the homepage, right? That's just not going to work. Now, another thing is obviously use dates instead of true or false. So if you ever have a thing that's true or false, a Boolean that you're going to be tracking, so want to make sure that we use a date instead of the actual true or false on that one. So please make sure that you get that set up. Now, another thing that is really important that I didn't talk about is you want to consolidate as much as possible. We want to let the properties do most of the work. So like I said earlier, if you have somebody who signed up and you have 3 different ways that they can authenticate, whether that's Google, Facebook, or email, you do not want to put signed up using email or signed up using Google Auth or signed up using Facebook as the event name. And the reason why is because for you to measure now the number of signups you have to look at 3 different events and do random math. We really want to make it so that it's all consolidated into these events, and we want to make sure that we disseminate differences of things through the properties. So for an example, another one would be instead of putting viewed pricing page, you would just have viewed page, and then you would have a property that would be a property name, which would be page, and a property value that would be pricing. Now, this is the main way that you would do this for most tools. I will add, though, if you're using KISSmetrics to implement and you're trying to measure specific pages or specific actions, KISSmetrics have a different way of thinking about the world. So sometimes with KISSmetrics, you do need to add viewed pricing page as the event, just only in KISSmetrics. KISSmetrics is the only weird one that does this, and it's really, really weird. Nobody else does it that way. So just if you're doing KISSmetrics, make sure you reach out. Now, after you do this internal review, we want to make sure everybody agrees. Now, a couple things we've learned over time is how to really make this good. So one, there's a lot of things that you're not going to agree on. Do not remove it. Use a strike through so that way we can see that this was attempted and somebody didn't like it, and use a strike through to basically get rid of it. Leave great details on what an event and property mean. Do not write, this is the page on the left, right? It just doesn't give us enough context. What we want to basically do is be very, very descriptive, because this document is going to be something that your intern, your new people, your CEO, your developers, all are eventually going to have to read. So we want to be very, very descriptive. And then the next one to understand, this is going to be your Bible for analytics. Like, this is the most important document that you may create inside of your company, because if you screw up your company analytics and you screw up your stack, your business is screwed. I'm working with a client right now on basically refactoring all of their stack, and they literally cannot move forward with growing the business because their stack is so bad. They can't tell how much money to spend. They can't tell how much money it costs to acquire a customer. They have no idea what's going on. They're basically driving blind, and they are basically trying to grow, but they don't know what is profitable and what's not. So make sure that you take your time when doing this and plan accordingly. Now, here's something that's really important that most people forget about. Make sure what you're creating actually works in the tool downstream. So for an example, it may say in segment, it can do this. However, if you go to that tool, it may not work correctly. And I just used an example. I said, do not put the property name, I do not put the page name in the event name. However, we just learned in KISSmetrics, that may not work. However, if I do put viewed page and then use the property of pricing, it would work perfectly in Mixpanel. However, it may not work in KISSmetrics. And the same thing goes with using identify calls and traits calls and alias calls. There's all these different things. So make sure that you do your research and that it's actually going to work with that tool before you ever do the developer review, which let's talk about now. Now, after you have come up with your analytics schema or your spec, whatever you want to call it, you're then going to need to basically do your developer review. Now, the first most important thing, as I said earlier, is make sure you track as little as possible in the first couple sprints. Make sure that your team understands. Make sure you get the nomenclature correct. But when you get to developer review, please make sure that you're as organized as possible. The first thing you don't want to do is make them pull their hair out. Developers typically don't like marketers in the first place. They don't like marketing. They don't like salespeople. I should know this. I used to work at one of the leading online education for developers. Being a marketer at that company was difficult because we could not use general marketing tactics because our developer community would try to kill me. It was really, really crazy. However, I learned a lot there about this stuff. So one thing is make sure you're very, very organized and prepared before you ever try to show them the spec, because we want to make sure that you don't look like a fool and you don't make them frustrated, because once you lose engineering support, you're screwed. Now, come prepared with your clean spec. Make sure that it's cleaned up, all your notes are taken care of, and everything is done. And what I want to do is show out a couple things that we've added to this spec by the time we got to the developer stage. One, we have the event name like we talked about. We have logged in. We also have the trigger, which clearly explains that so the developer can understand. We still have our property name, our property value, really, really good descriptions, and some JavaScript examples. So we want to make sure this is all fleshed out. You'll notice that we took those people properties and we added them to the same place. So for an example, on this one, account was activated. We want to know the account activated date on that user profile. So we actually store the date that that account was activated. So really, really easy there. Now, there's some cool things that we have on the left-hand side, which you may not see anywhere else. You'll notice that we have sprint, we have server or client, and then we also have integrated. Now, the sprint is basically going to be the priority. So sprint number 1, first priority, sprint number 2, second priority. This means the first time the developers go and integrate, they're probably going to do sprint 1, and then next time they go to do it, they're going to do sprint 2. Now, we also have it marked as server or client. The developers will help you understand this. There's certain things that you have to track from the server side, which are going to be like build, signed up, or purchased. However, on the client side, which is what we see on the website from our computers, there's a lot of things like that we can track there, such as page views and things like that. We can track that on the client. Now, the developers will help you understand what you can do. We also have an integrated column, which allows us to know that whether the developer has actually integrated that or not. That way, we can actually project manage this. And then you'll also notice that we have an audited. This audited allows us to basically say, hey, we have audited the code. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you're going to explain all of this. Now, there's some important things that I've learned over my time working with a lot of engineers, especially ones on my team and on other teams. The first thing is do not get defensive when they say you can't do something, okay? They're simply telling you they can't do it from a technical perspective. Not that they don't want to or not that they don't support you, but the moment that you get defensive or combative, it basically causes hurdles, and we don't want to see that. Now, also understand that you will have to compromise. It is really important to understand that you cannot accomplish everything that you want to do in the current framework that you probably live in. The coding technology you use, to the types of servers that you use, to the way that the data can be structured on your database, all of this is going to make it so that some things can or cannot be accomplished from your events perspective. So please take the time and be willing to compromise. Do not get combative. They definitely want to help you. It's just sometimes things are not possible. Now, the next thing is engineering doesn't hate you. They just don't work for you. One thing that I've seen happen at a lot of companies is marketing teams or even sales teams get very frustrated because engineering is not willing to do what they say immediately. And that's because engineering doesn't work for you. They work for the CTO. They work for other parts of the company. They don't hate you. They just don't work for you. And sometimes marketers take it to the fact that, hey, marketers or engineers need to do whatever I say, blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, it's just not how it works. We're one big happy family and a team. Take your time and try to make it so it's easy for them. Now, another thing is when you're told no, try to find a workaround. If you ever bring up a data schema to your developers and you're told, no, we can't do this, just reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you. It'll be really, really simple to find a workaround. But be prepared to do that and be prepared to explain yourself. Now, once you've done that and had a meeting with your developers, what we then need you to do is revise the spec. Do not jump right into integrating. You need to make sure that you do a revision on your spec and everything is clean. And do this revision over a month, 2 month, or even 3 month period and make sure that your data spec is right. Because if you mess up this stage, it doesn't matter how much integration you do. All the data is going to be corrupted. You're going to have huge issues and you're not going to trust anything. Now, once you've revised this spec, a big important thing to make sure you remember is do not immediately put this on your production server. Make sure this goes to a staging server. Make sure that staging server is connected to a test account in one of these tools. And do not push anything to your live account until after it's been audited. So just a little bit of tip there. Make sure that you audit all of your code before you ever push it to your production accounts. Now, let me show you a quick way to cheat, because I obviously have had to work with many, many developers in my career, and I've always had to be blocked by the fact that engineering has to build this feature. I want you to be able to get shit done on your own, okay? So there's some really, really cool things that you can do to use this or do this all on your own. First one is KISSmetrics. KISSmetrics is built by marketers for marketers. So it is set up in a way that marketers can basically get started without their engineering team. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. However, if you haven't used Google Tag Manager, I highly recommend that you check it out. Google Tag Manager, once it's installed on the website by your developers, you can basically add any JavaScript or any code to the site without their approval, right? You can basically just launch a new tag without having to get developers involved. So really, really good stuff. I'm not going to go in depth about Tag Manager, but if you do have questions, go to effinamazing.com, check out our blog. We got some good Tag Manager stuff over there. Now, let's talk about KISSmetrics, okay? Because the biggest thing that we need to build as a marketer or a salesperson is we basically need to build a funnel. And I want you to be able to build a funnel without ever having to talk to a developer, because you need to start tracking today. Now, with KISSmetrics, it makes this really, really dead simple. And this is one of the only things that I am highly big recommender of KISSmetrics for, is basically the fact that they have a editor in the back end that enables you to do your own event tracking. Now, as I said, an event is simply an action a user takes. So on their back end, we can go to their event wizard. You can then say, when a person does a visit to this page, whatever the URL is, I want you to record the event purchased. So let's say, for an example, you have a thank you page after somebody purchases. Anytime somebody visits that page, we basically track an event called purchase. And this is enough for us to basically be able to build a simple funnel. Now, if you do this for multiple different things in your funnel, like viewed homepage, viewed sign up page, and then the sign up page, you can basically track your funnel, right? And you can really start to understand what's going on. Now, this is super helpful because you never even got a developer involved. You just did this all on the back end of their service, and you were able to build a funnel. Now, another cool thing is the fact that KISSmetrics is directly integrated with tools like Optimizely, right? So you'll notice that we had an experiment on our homepage. We can see that there was a create free account experiment and a get started experiment. And this was simply an A/B test that we ran on our homepage with different things on the call to action button. So one button said create account, one said get started. Now we'll notice that roughly the same amount of people went through that homepage and saw that. However, we'll notice that the create free account, a lot more people actually made it to the sign up page because they had that create free account. Now the interesting thing is if you look the next stage down, we'll notice that the conversion rate actually is different. So people who had create free account converted at 4.4% from that step. And then even before that, they converted at 4.5%. So even though the get started had less people that made it through to that actual sign up page, if we look at the total value, we actually had a lot more people who actually did the sign up. And all of this was able to be done and tracked without ever once having a developer. Because in KISSmetrics, you can build out these stages of the funnel by using their WYSIWYG editor basically on the back end. Now, let's keep talking about things. Obviously, you need to integrate all these things. So if you created an analytics spec and you need help, just let me know. But if you did that and you talked with your developers, you're going to need to get all these things integrated. This is going to require work from the engineering team to basically write out code. Now, don't be afraid to work with the developers, right? Sit down and do pairing with them. So basically all that means is that the developer is writing the code and you're there with them to basically answer any questions they have, make sure that you get all the value that you need. Don't be afraid to work with them. A lot of marketers and a lot of salespeople are scared of developers. I don't know why. They're great people, but definitely don't be afraid to pair with them. Now, another important thing is that you need to make sure that you audit all of your code on staging, like I said earlier. So when this code gets rolled out, we basically are going to roll it out on our staging site, not on our production site. If you don't know what that stuff is, just definitely hit me up. But we want to basically go into the live view of whatever tool we're using to see those events come in. So for an example, we have all these page viewed events inside the tool. We want to make sure that they're all coming in correctly. So you'll notice that we have all these different emails coming in, the referring domains. We can see this is local because this is on our staging environment. But we want to make sure that we audit all of this before we ever get this out to production. Now, this is basically what it's going to look like in KISSmetrics backend, right? So what and how are you auditing, right? So this is the live feed from KISSmetrics. So those events that we incorporated, we can actually see them happening on the site. So like add campaign hit is a small one here, visited the site is another one here. We can basically see all the different actions. Now, what you want to do when you do this auditing is you want to audit every event name and every property for spelling, capitalization, and correct firing. Now, here's a little tip. If you write Facebook with a capital F in one place and Facebook with a lowercase in a separate place, those are going to be considered two separate properties. If you write signed up with capital in one place and signed up in another place with a lower, those are two separate different events. You want to make sure that your capitalization is always the same. Key thing is make everything lowercase. In analytics, nothing should ever be capitalized ever. Quick tip, really, really good one there. Always lowercase everything. Now, like I said, and I'm going to reiterate this again, do this in a test account and on a staging environment. Do not pump this data directly into your production KISSmetrics account. If you have a KISSmetrics account, a Mixpanel account, an Amplitude account, a Segment account, a HubSpot, all you have to do is create a separate profile or project that has a different API key, put all of your staging and stuff in there, and then obviously once it's flipped to production, then you pump it into production. But make sure everything is correct before you ever go to production, because we've seen so many people corrupt their good data sets by not doing that. Once again, nothing goes into production until audit. Once it is in, it's in. So don't screw it up, okay? Once something goes into your analytics tool, it can't come out, and they don't let you change it. They don't let you hide it. It's basically just there. Now, once everybody is cool with it, we want to make sure that we're able to find everybody that has to come in. So does the CEO understand? Does the business manager understand? All those things. We can basically deploy and analyze. Now, this is pretty straightforward. Now, once it's deployed to production, it's obviously going to flow through. Now, Google Analytics is obviously a traffic tool. I don't recommend using this for all of your good stuff. But once again, if you're sending events into Segment, you can send those events over to Google Analytics. And Google Analytics is ultimately a traffic tool. Now, if you're using tools like Mixpanel, you now have cohort analysis. So basically you can say, I want to see users that sign up and then how long after they sign up before they ever come back. And that's what a cohort report does. So basically we're looking at a specific date. So to put this in easier terms, let's say that you went to high school and you graduated class of 2003 like I did. That would mean that I'm in the cohort of 2003 graduates. And if they were to ever look back and try to analyze whether we were successful, they would bulk us in the cohort of 2003 and then analyze us based upon that. Same with 2004, that would be a separate cohort, 2005. So you can also do that with your signups. You can do that on a monthly basis, a daily basis, weekly. You can start to understand what is your life or how long do people stick around. So cohort reports are really, really helpful. Next one is obviously going to be funnels. Really, really important. If you don't have funnel tracking right now, you definitely need to get it set up. I will be clear, Google Analytics does have some funnel reports. They are not very good. You want to make sure that you get some other type of funnel reporting tool because KISSmetrics, Mixpanel, Amplitude, those tools basically are going to give you a lot more ways to look at your data and be really, really helpful. Now, obviously, money is really important. And this is a simple revenue report from Mixpanel. It looks a little bit different now. They just did a relaunch a couple weeks or maybe a couple months ago now that basically shows all that stuff. However, we can track how much money did I make today, how much money did I make this month, how much lifetime value do I have per customer, and then as well as if we were really to drill in, we can actually see lifetime value per channel. We can understand which channel, like this purple line here, is driving more of our lifetime value. Meanwhile, this red one is not driving high lifetime value. It enables us to understand where do we actually make money, and then as well as where do we actually lose money. Now, another thing is going to be an advanced segmentation report. Now, this is basically looking at one individual event. This is traffic coming back to our site based upon the actual advertiser that's sending us traffic. So we can create a pretty pie chart. We are definitely looking at the media source at which these people are coming back. And we can see right now, Brightroll, Tapjoy, AdMob are all driving traffic. But really quickly, we can see that Brightroll is driving our largest percent of traffic. Meanwhile, Twitter is driving our lowest percentage of traffic. So these are just some of the simple reports that you can create once you get your taxonomy and event schema set up and make it really, really easy. Now, as I said earlier, you need to start out small. I would start with 1 week sprints from the developer per month, have them do a 1 week sprint of maybe 5 events. And then over the rest of that month, you do analysis, you do auditing, and then you get that stuff out. And then once a month, you do 1 sprint. Try to keep it small. Don't do too big. Make sure that it keeps really, really limited. So once you do that, keep repeating until you have all of your events tracked and everything set up, and then you should be pretty good to go. Now, as a last thing here is if you are interested in improving your analytics, please check us out. We definitely have a free analytics consultation I would like to offer you. If you were to email Tony@effinamazing.com, he'll be able to help you get set up with a free consultation. I'll help you figure out your analytics, make sure you're using the right tool, give you any tips or tricks that you need to do. If you have questions for me, you can reach out to me on Twitter, either at Daniel McGaw, or once again, you can email or hit me on Twitter at effinamazing.com. But thank you so much for joining us. I'd love to see if there's any questions that I can answer for anybody.
Hey, Dan, thanks a bunch. This has been great. There was one question, and I see that the person who asked it has left, but there may be some value for the others. The question was, doesn't Google Tag Manager accomplish the same thing as Segment?
Absolutely not. And that is a big, big confusion with a lot of people. Tag Manager only tracks what happens on your website. So, for an example, if somebody signed up to your website, it can track the fact that they signed up, but there's a lot of things that happen on the server, like your billing events. Tag Manager can't see what happens on the server. Now, Tag Manager is basically a JavaScript you add to your website, and then you can add other JavaScripts inside of it, but it just enables you to add tags to your website overall. Segment does a lot more than that, and the fact that it actually translates all of these things back to Segment and into the other tools. So you actually get a lot more robust of tracking. In our company, we actually add Segment in through Tag Manager. We add all of our Segment tags and things like that into Tag Manager for tracking. However, we also run a lot of our server-side stuff directly to Segment and into other tools. So Tag Manager would track, as we would call the client side, but it doesn't allow you to track anything on the server. So that's the hugest difference there. And that's the biggest difference that most people need to be concerned about.
Next question is, what do you recommend for e-commerce?
Great question. And a lot of that comes down to definitely the different types of integrations that you're going to have and what e-commerce cart you're using. There's platforms like KISSmetrics, which do a really, really good job with e-commerce. There's another one called Zaius, which is Zaius. Zaius is like a full suite of marketing automation and analytics, which is specifically built for e-commerce. Another one, obviously, is like Amplitude and Mixpanel do a pretty good job. The only place that Mixpanel kind of drops the ball is they don't do well with cross-device attribution. So like a user uses a mobile app, a user uses a desktop. It's not good at tying those two identities together. So definitely don't recommend that if you have a popular e-commerce store. But platforms like Amplitude do really good with e-commerce as well. It can track every single thing you need it to do. But it also depends on like what platform you built on. If you're on Infusionsoft, like you should just shut down your e-commerce store altogether. Infusionsoft is kind of not really good with that stuff. Infusionsoft is really, really bad with allowing you to add JavaScript to your websites. So those are some of the simple ones, though.
Next question. Can you exclude events from the same person using a different device, like if they signed on desktop and started to visit the site with their mobile device?
Can you? I would have to better understand the question and the fact that, like, can you exclude the device or can you exclude the event?
It's saying, can you exclude events and
Yes.
the device? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can make it so that you ignore certain things that happen. So, like one common thing is that, like, let's say that somebody is at a hotel and they're using the kiosk computer. They may sign into their account. You would have an event that basically starts tracking once they sign in. However, once they sign out, you basically have a call that's clear cookies, which basically says, "Hey, remove this user from this computer. We no longer want to track this as if it was the user." You can set up all kinds of things to do different things. It just depends on how much development work you want to do. I mean, that's the cool thing about the internet is just about anything is possible. It just depends on how much money do you want to spend to make it possible.
Okay, yeah, he liked that answer. He thanked you for that. The next question, I'm going to read through it. I haven't got it fully comprehended, but it is loving the detail. We use completion of a website lead form as our goal. We struggle a bit with getting the highest quality lead filling this form out, not the most people. We lean on specific content to bring in the right leads, blog posts, and required qualifying questions in the form of in the form to filter. Will these tools help with increasing quality of leads?
Well, I wouldn't say that they would increase the quality of leads themselves. I think it would help you identify what is driving quality leads. So, for an example, I mean, this is a huge problem that we face at KISSmetrics. KISSmetrics, we were getting 4,500 leads a month. We basically optimized our funnel. We went from 1,500 leads to 4,500 leads in a matter of 30 days. And our problem was that a lot of these leads just weren't qualified. So we had to come up with different ways to qualify these people and understand how to optimize for those qualified leads. So because we had a very robust tracking system, we can obviously identify where were these qualified leads coming from, where were the unqualified leads coming from, and then we were obviously able to optimize our marketing efforts to stop doing what the unqualified leads were coming from. As well as we also made it so that some of the unqualified leads just couldn't get to the specific pages to fill out that information. We no longer actually cared about those channels. So I wouldn't say that they're going to help you actually get those qualified leads, but it's going to give you the information to understand how you can get those things.
Great answer. Is there another question? Is there a way to set up an event that shows how many form fields a user fills out before abandoning the form submission?
Absolutely. We've seen this done in a lot of different ways. I personally don't do this in my analytics tools just because it creates a lot of noise. And if I do, if I am going to do that, I am going to be very specific about how I create those events. And the reason why I say that is because when somebody fills out or when somebody clicks on first name and then goes to the next cell, you can obviously track form field filled, right? And then obviously in the properties, you would say like, what field was it? You do not want to put filled out first name field, filled out last name field, filled out company name. That's just horrible because you're going to have too many events. It's going to dirty up your stuff. However, if you use the properties, you can basically isolate those things. Now, I typically focus a lot more on using tools like Hotjar to basically do heat mapping on those things to better understand how far somebody is going through something. But once again, people use analytics for it all the time. It just really depends on your personal preference and where you want to see that. But definitely for sure, I've seen a lot of people track form fields and where people drop off by using analytics, especially on longer forms. I mean, the first thing that I always try to do is I just want to get your email. I don't care about anything else. Give me your email, then I'll try to collect the rest of the information after you give me the email. Because if I don't have a means to communicate with you, it doesn't matter if I know your first name, last name, social security number, and birth date. I don't have a way to talk to you. If I have your email, all of that stuff definitely doesn't matter because I can collect that from you later.
Okay, this next question is one I like. It asks, do you work with Conversa Call Analytics to judge the quality of phone calls in these products coming through dynamic phone number insertion?
That's a great question. You can definitely use that. I know a lot of people do that really in Salesforce compared to just in Conversa. There's obviously a lot of value that you can get out of your Salesforce reporting as well, since that's usually tied directly to that lead and that contact record. But there's definitely great ways to be able to do that. Once again, I think Conversa has a direct integration with KISSmetrics as well, where you'll be able to measure that stuff. I highly recommend, though, measuring your phone calls in as many systems as you can, especially when you're doing analysis. A lot of people don't take into consideration of measuring like what's happening in Salesforce in their analytics tools. Just not very, very easy. We use a tool called Autopilot to help us do that stuff, but absolutely I would measure that data and see how good the call quality is based upon what is the referral or traffic source.
Good answer. Well, at this point, we're at a pause on questions. So anyone, if you've had a question that just you weren't sure you wanted to ask, now's a great time. Dan still has a little bit of time left for us, and you can get your answers if you'd like.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to thank everybody for coming out today. We really appreciate you taking out the time of your day to be able to join us for this webinar. I also appreciate Conversa for letting me come and do this. It's really, really honorable that you would invite me. So thank you very much.
You know, Dan, it's our pleasure. This is personally, I've gained a lot from this. It's been, I can see me applying a lot of this in the future to answer some questions of how we can take care of some of what we've been concerned about. So this is fantastic. Also, for everyone, as we get ready to conclude this, just as usual, we will have the recording of this webinar ready by tomorrow. We'll send an email with the link to everyone so you can review it if you'd like, and definitely share it with those of you know who would like to hear it that didn't get to hear it. But we'll have that out to you by tomorrow. So if there are no more questions, once again, Dan, thanks a lot. I know several comments on here, a lot of expressions of an excellent webinar, a lot of information. I appreciated your presentation. You did a great job with this and very solid information.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Already. Oh, yep, more thank yous on here. So, okay, thanks a lot, Dan. Thanks, everyone, and we'll talk to you all next time.
All right, bye.